Writing your first novel or memoir is harder than anyone tells you. You have ideas that won't let you go, maybe even a lot of pages, but you keep second guessing yourself, getting stuck, or wondering if you're heading in the right direction. The Emerging Writers Academy is a private membership for first-time novelists and memoir writers. You get monthly masterclasses on craft, live group coaching, and a community of writers who are doing the work to write, revise, and finish. Doors are opening for just a couple of days in March. Get on the wait list at nancypanuccio.com/writer, and you'll be the first to know the moment the doors open. nancypanuccio.com/writer. The most powerful backstory doesn't just tell us what happened, it shows us how what happened is still happening, how the past is an active force in the present story. Writer Unleashed is for you, a writer who has a story you want to bring onto the page and into the hearts and minds of readers. I'm Nancy Panuccio, writer, editor, and book coach. Each week, we'll explore techniques, mindsets, and inspiration for writing stories readers can't put down. Thanks for spending some time with me today. Now, let's begin. Today, we're tackling something that trips up nearly every manuscript that comes across my desk, and that is backstory. You know your character needs context. Readers need to understand why your protagonist fears commitment or fled their hometown or can't trust authority figures. But here's the problem. The moment you stop your forward-moving story to explain what happened 5 years ago, 20 years ago, yesterday even, you kill your narrative momentum. The reader was invested in what's happening now, and suddenly they're going back in time and getting bogged down with the history of the character and losing the thread of what's happening now. This happens a lot, especially in Act 1, and this creates a dilemma. You need context, but you can't afford to bore your readers or take them on a grand detour into the past, and then they forget about what's happening in the present story. So today I'm giving you 3 specific strategies for integrating backstory that keeps your narrative moving forward. But first, let's get clear on what backstory's job is. Most writers think backstory exists to explain things. And yes, explanation is part of it. But if backstory only explains, it's just information delivery. And information delivery is dull. Good backstory does 3 things simultaneously. Number 1, it deepens the present moment, making what's happening right now more urgent and emotionally resonant. Number 2, it creates or complicates the stakes. It raises questions. It doesn't just answer them. And number 3, it reveals character through specificity, showing us how the past shaped who they are right now in this moment, making this choice. It helps us understand how your character came into the story wanting what he or she wants. When backstory does all 3, it doesn't feel like a detour. It feels like a deepening of the story you're already telling. So here are the strategies. Strategy number 1, deliver backstory when the present urgently needs it. This first strategy is about timing. When you reveal backstory matters as much as how you reveal it. So the principle is that backstory should arrive the moment that not knowing it would create confusion, it might undermine the stakes, or make the character's behavior not easy to comprehend. It's not something you insert into the story just in case the reader might need this later. You want to bring it in right when the present moment desperately needs context from the past. What doesn't work is front-loading backstory, especially in Act 1, especially in Chapter 1. This is when you open your story with backstory, or you include it in the first chapter to establish your character before anything has happened yet, before we've developed an appetite for their situation. And I see this constantly. Something like, Sarah had always been afraid of water. When she was 7, she'd nearly drowned at summer camp. And then the story spends 3 paragraphs or maybe even several pages on childhood trauma before we even know who Sarah is or what story we're in. And the problem isn't that this backstory is irrelevant. The problem is it's arriving before the reader needs or wants deeper insight. Front-loaded backstory can take us on a detour before we've developed an appetite for the current situation or come to care for your character. So what works? You want to introduce backstory when confusion or stakes demand it. So for example, you can establish Sarah in the present first, get us invested. Then when her fear of water becomes relevant to what's happening right now, then you can give us some backstory. Sarah stared at the capsized kayak, her friend's head bobbing in the current 20 feet away. So now we're in a scene with immediate stakes. That's when you bring in the backstory. She was 7 again, water closing over her head, camp counselors shouting from the dock, but not jumping in, not fast enough. So the backstory isn't interrupting the present moment, it's explaining it right when the reader needs that insight. Why isn't she jumping in? Because trauma is keeping her frozen. Donna Tartt does this brilliantly in her novel, The Goldfinch. The novel opens with teenage Theo hiding in a hotel room in Amsterdam. Now, Tartt could have explained everything up front, but she doesn't. She establishes the present crisis first. Theo is in danger, he's alone, and he's made catastrophic choices. And only then does she take us back to the museum explosion that killed his mother. That backstory doesn't arrive until we're desperate to understand how Theo ended up here. By the time we get it, we're hungry for it. So don't give readers information before they become hungry for it. Make them curious first. Make them need that backstory first. Okay, on to strategy number 2. Filter backstory through present action. This strategy is about how you deliver backstory. You always want to filter it through something happening in the present. So the principle is that backstory should be triggered by current events, not narrated as a separate information dump. Memories should arise because something in the present calls them up. It could be a smell, it could be a sound, it could be a gesture, it could be a choice that echoes a choice they made before. What doesn't work is stopping time for exposition. And this is the classic mistake. Something like, Emma sat at the kitchen table staring at the divorce papers. She thought about how she and Mark had met. It was 10 years ago at a friend's wedding. And then we get 3 paragraphs, maybe even several pages about their courtship. So the story stopped. Emma froze while the narrator delivered this mini biography. When you stop the present to deliver backstory, you're hitting pause. Readers feel that pause. The momentum stops and it doesn't feel integrated. What does work is memories integrated with action. David Nichols does this beautifully in his novel, You Are Here. When Marnie, the co-protagonist, thinks about her ex-husband, we get a brief paragraph about a single specific moment that captures their entire dynamic before the divorce. It's not their whole marriage history. It's one specific memory triggered by something in her present situation. Here's the passage. Like many self-employed people, she found it hard to leave the work behind. Once, in a bar, her husband had ordered a vodka tonic. Vodka and tonic, she'd said before she could stop herself. He closed his eyes and exhaled slowly. Marnie, he'd said, please do not fucking dare to edit me. And she'd been glad then that he was leaving. That one moment tells us everything we need to know about this marriage in the past. And then the next time we meet Marnie, we're back in the present scene. So the backstory isn't a separate section. It's woven into what's happening now, a memory arising, giving us context, then immediately returning us to the present action in the next chapter where we're with Marnie. The backstory isn't a separate section, and it doesn't go on and on. It's woven into what's happening now, a memory arising from the present, giving us context, and then immediately returning us to the present action in the following chapter where we're with Marnie. So you want to anchor backstory in present action. Make memory a response to what's happening, not a break from it. Okay, last one, strategy 3. Make backstory create new problems, not just explain old ones. The third strategy is about function, what backstory should do in your story. So the principle is what the character remembers should complicate what they're doing now, not just provide this historical context. This is the difference between backstory that feels essential and backstory that just feels like filler. What doesn't work is backstory that merely explains. So for example, Rachel hesitated before calling her mother. She'd always had a complicated relationship with her. Her mother had been critical when Rachel was growing up, never satisfied with Rachel's choices. Now we know Rachel has mother issues, but what did this backstory do besides explain that? It didn't raise the stakes. It didn't create a new problem. It just told us something we could have inferred from Rachel's hesitation. What works is backstory that escalates the conflict. Rachel hesitated before calling her mother. The last time they'd spoken, her mother had mentioned running into Daniel casually, like it was nothing, like she didn't know Rachel had been avoiding him for 6 years, like she didn't know why, which meant either her mother genuinely didn't remember what Daniel had done, which seemed impossible, or she remembered and didn't care, or worse, she was trying to push Rachel back toward him. Okay, so now the backstory isn't just explaining their difficult relationship, it's raising a new question. Why did her mother mention Daniel? What does she know? What does she want? So the memory adds stakes to the phone call Rachel is about to make. It creates forward momentum instead of stopping it. Gillian Flynn does this devastatingly in Gone Girl. Amy's diary entries are backstory. They tell us about the past, how she and Nick met, their marriage deteriorating, but they don't just explain, they actively mislead us about the present. They're creating a false narrative that complicates our understanding of what's happening now. Even before we discover the diary is fabricated, those entries work because they're not providing answers. They're generating new problems. Each entry raises questions about Nick. Did he really do these things? Is he the villain that Amy is portraying? So the most powerful backstory doesn't just tell us what happened. It shows us how what happened is still happening, how the past is an active force in the present story. Now, even essential backstory can be brief. Most of the time, you need far less than you think. For example, in the opening scene of Revolutionary Road, April is on stage in an amateur play. Yates expertly weaves backstory into this paragraph. Her name was April Wheeler, and she caused the whispered word lovely to roll out over the auditorium the first time she walked across the stage. A little later, there were hopeful nudges and whispers of, "She's good," and there were stately nods of pride among the several people who happened to know that she had attended one of the leading dramatic schools of New York less than 10 years before. That's it. One phrase folded into the present action that tells us everything we need to know. April had ambitions once. She gave them up, and now she's trying to reclaim something she lost. We don't need her entire drama school history. We just need that single fact delivered in the moment we're watching her perform, so that when the play fails spectacularly, we know the stakes. And it sets up the fight she and her husband have on the way home. Sometimes, though, you need more than a sentence. Later in the novel, Yeats gives us an extended backstory scene. It's in a separate chapter. This is young Frank's first visit to the Knox building with his father when he's 10. This chapter, this scene, accomplishes multiple things simultaneously. It establishes Frank's present inner conflict. First, he's enamored by the height of the building. He's in his suit and tie, and he's admiring himself in the reflection of the window. Then he starts to feel nauseated on the elevator ride up. He feels no movement in the elevator, and that's a perfect metaphor for his current life in the present. It also reveals that his father was passed over for a promotion in this very building and how Frank works there. So there's this passed down legacy of disappointment and conformity, and it's kind of devastating. But it explains how Frank comes into the story with his conflicting desires. It shows us the moment Frank learned to perform admiration for something that actually made him sick inside, a pattern that he's still living. So even when backstory is doing this much work, revealing how your character came into the story wanting what he wants and complicating the present stakes, it should still be as economical as possible. Get in, do the work, and get out. The goal is significance without the sprawl. One powerful moment beats 3 pages of history every time. So here's how to put it into practice. How do you integrate backstory without killing momentum? Here's what you need to remember. First, timing is everything. Deliver backstory the moment the present urgently needs it, when confusion or stakes demand deeper context, not before that. Second, anchor memories in present action. Backstory should be triggered by what's happening now. Filter the past through the present. Don't stop the present to deliver the past. And third, make backstory create problems, not just explain them. What the character remembers should complicate their current situation, raise new questions, and add new stakes. The past should be an active force in the present story. Here's the thing. Once you understand these 3 strategies, backstory stops being something you insert. It starts being one of your most powerful storytelling tools. You're not just filling in history, you're deepening every present moment. You're raising the stakes, and you're giving your story the emotional resonance it needs. So go find those backstory passages in your story that are currently stopping your story cold and make them work harder for you. So there you have it. Thanks for hanging out with me today. If you know any writers who need some support in their writing, please share this episode or the Writer Unleashed podcast in general. And if you love what you're listening to, subscribe on your favorite listening platform. And if you're listening on Apple, please leave me a review. Reading how this podcast impacts your writing truly lights me up and helps me create topics for the show. Till next time, keep writing, and I'll talk to you soon.